Never live on the battlefield where you make your money. This isn't just a suggestion, it is the ultimate survival rule followed by the American old money families you see living here. In the coming cycle, AI will disrupt every industry. Can we still hold on to the wealth we have? Today, I'm taking you to a small town neighboring New York to find the answer. The most magical thing about this city isn't that it teaches you how to get rich, but that it teaches you how to keep risk away from your doorstep and ensure your wealth lasts for generations. Welcome to Greenwich, the ground zero of risk for American wealth. Leaving behind the frantic, non-stop pace of New York, about an hour's drive to the northeast brings you to Greenwich. You'll immediately notice that the world here feels like it's been set to mute. If New York measures the speed of making money in seconds, Greenwich has spent hundreds of years calculating just one thing: how to protect everything you've earned in a lifetime. Keep risk outside the gate, and let your wealth pass from generation to generation. Before I arrived, I wondered, why exactly is Greenwich called the ground zero of wealth risk? To answer that, we have to look at the city's name. Back in 1640, when European immigrants first settled here, it was a small port town. In Old English, Greenwich means green harbor or safe haven. Those early settlers hoped the name would protect them, that no matter how big the waves were outside, they could always come back to the harbor and dock safely. Later, as neighboring New Amsterdam transformed into New York, the people in the world's financial capital developed a nearly religious belief. New York is responsible for commanding the financial winds and rains, while Greenwich is responsible for the wealth docking safely. Fast forward over 100 years, and those who steadfastly hold this belief in wealth preservation now have a familiar nickname: Old Money. In this small town, you can pick any family at random, and their name will be legendary. Take, for instance, a man named Prescott Bush. Sound familiar? The Bush family moved from New York to Greenwich. They were bankers with a very strict family code, worked desperately to serve society, lived desperately low profile. Under this creed, the family later produced two presidents, Bush 41 and Bush 43. This family's wealth has endured for over a century. Old money primarily looks at a time scale that spans cycles. If new money met old money on the street and asked, "Can I make a killing this time?" the old money would only offer one piece of advice: you'd better be careful this time, or you might find yourself back at square one, restarting your life. This brings us to our first wealth question of the episode. How can I become old money? The answer from the old money in Greenwich might be very inspiring for younger viewers. Becoming old money isn't something one generation can achieve. Just focus on doing what a first-generation person should do: understand and control risk. Be young and enterprising, but never reckless. And always remember the advice old money gives to new money: never live on the battlefield where you make your money. The fear of aging is written into our genes. Especially as you enter middle age, you start to ask a question you'd never think of when you're young. How much longer can I keep fighting on the battlefield of life? This anxiety is infinitely magnified by the noise around us, leading many into a fatal illusion that they must stay on the battlefield forever. But the old money in Greenwich will tell you, never live on the battlefield where you make your money. This isn't geographical advice. I'm not telling you to move right this second. It's a form of psychological risk hedging. An or brain in constant stress mode instinctively pursues short-term feedback. It mistakes short-term gains for long-term strategy, which is disastrous for the long-term layout of any wealth. The first top-tier player to advocate this wealth philosophy was J.P. Morgan. He was known as America's risk dispatcher during the 1907 financial crisis. While every banker in America was on the streets of Manhattan in a state of hopeless collapse, what was Morgan doing? He isolated himself in his private library, dispatching the major bankers to make centralized decisions for a market bailout. His reasoning was simple. At the center of the battlefield, the louder the noise, the worse your judgment becomes. On the battlefield, you live for the moment. You have no time for long-term rational decisions. This creed of distancing yourself from the battlefield has been passed down to hedge fund managers today. One of the most faithful practitioners is Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates.
I'd like to welcome you to the greatest town in my home, the greatest town, Greenwich, Connecticut. And there's a reason that Greenwich, Connecticut, there's a reason it's the center of hedge funds. There's a reason that it's such a great community. And the reason I also want to welcome you is that I look out on the audience, and I have friends here that are neighbors.
He is one of many titans in Greenwich. These hedge fund managers are the most sensitive to risk in the world. Their choice to settle in Greenwich, far from New York, helps us answer another wealth question. Do the old money elites leave the front lines because they're too old to play the game? The answer is clearly no. Being old doesn't mean losing, it means repackaging yourself. This leads to our second wealth question. How can middle-aged people protect their wealth across economic cycles? Many middle-aged people fear path dependency, the idea that one trick will work forever. Every economic cycle is designed to smash those very rice bowls. So when the cycle shifts, leave the battlefield temporarily and start planning the second half of your life. In middle age, it's no longer about speed. It's about repackaging yourself and your understanding of the new rules. And if you've successfully started your second half, remember the English proverb, money talks, wealth whispers. Or as the Eastern saying goes, keep a low profile and make a fortune. There was once a wealthy woman in New York who, when she passed away, left a $12 million inheritance to a small dog. The protagonist was Leona Helmsley, the famous queen of mean hotel magnate. I'm currently driving to her estate in Greenwich. The dog who inherited that massive fortune was named Trouble. The ruling actually caused quite a trouble for the judge. No one imagined she was rich enough to leave $10 million to a dog. Wealth in the mountains brings relatives from afar. Look at these mountain roads just to get to her house. This rich woman lived way too far out. There's still a lot of wild land up here. Her relatives, the media, and lawyers all had their eyes on that money. The question is, if you were the judge, how would you rule? Declare it void, or give it all to the dog? The judge ultimately did the math. The dog eats steak every day and could be assigned a nanny and a bodyguard. For the rest of the dog's life, $2 million was more than enough. So the judge ruled that $12 million was a bit much, but $2 million was immediately allocated to the dog. Many people treat this ruling as a joke. But if you truly care about the safety of your wealth and hope to pass it down, you'll see the logic in this verdict. It represents the realization capability of a society's wealth system. As people age, they worry that once they are gone, the system won't honor its property promises. This ruling proved that if the inheritance rights of a dog can be seriously discussed and reasonably executed, it shows a high level of wealth security. Tea doesn't go cold when the person leaves. You'll notice an interesting phenomenon. The more elite the wealth, the more invisible it becomes. These mansions don't even have house numbers. Old money believes in that phrase, money talks, wealth whispers. Small money makes a lot of noise. Big wealth stays quiet. By staying quiet, the old money keeps uncontrollable variables low, which naturally makes wealth preservation stronger. However, if you think old money just gets rich by hiding and hoarding, you're underestimating them. Old money often makes moves that regular people can't understand, like putting massive amounts of family wealth into places that don't make any money at all. If someone asked what you fear most after becoming rich, and you could only pick one thing, I bet 9 out of 10 people would say they fear disorder. turmoil caused by social disorder can be devastating to anyone's wealth. So what maintains order? Thousands of years of human civilization have verified one truth. The only long-term effective method is collective belief. You have a belief that the law protects property. You have a belief that knowledge changes destiny. You have a belief that contracts will be honored. And you have to renew the subscription constantly to maintain that value. This subscription isn't something an average person can handle. Beliefs are exceptionally expensive. This is a defensive wealth strategy passed down by old money. Walking through Greenwich, you'll see churches, libraries, parks, museums.
That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All maintained with extreme dignity. We have to mention someone we discussed in the Pittsburgh episode of our city series, the Steel King, Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie once famously said, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." He didn't just say it, he lived it. You can see his shadow in the founding of these libraries. He donated libraries all over the world. Why did he spend a fortune on them? Many people think donating money is just about buying a reputation. But those who watched our previous episodes will understand. Carnegie grew up very poor. He had no opportunity to get an education. In that era, most libraries were private. After he became successful, his great realization was that if a society leaves poor children with no hope for upward mobility, if knowledge becomes a monopoly of the rich, then no matter how high the rich build their walls, they will one day be torn down by a desperate populace. So generation after generation, old money donates libraries, parks, land for playgrounds, and museum collections. They raise the knowledge and cultural level of the public. This is how they renew the subscription to the social wealth order. Even if some say the rich do charity only for their descendants, I agree. Humans are inherently selfish. But when you lengthen the time scale of wealth, you realize the biggest beneficiary of the social order bought by the rich is still the average person. Our assets are limited, and our ability to resist risk is weaker. Only if we believe in the existence of social order will the wealth of ordinary people not be consumed by social violence. In my understanding, whether you make a lot of money or a little, becoming old money isn't what matters in this turbulent society. What matters is that we can cross the next economic cycle together and see the sunrise after the storm. Behind the scenes, I want to talk about how this shoot came to be. This city special wasn't actually in my plan. It was a complete coincidence. I was on a business trip to the East Coast, and an old mentor hosted me in Long Island, New York. After dinner, when he heard I was heading to Boston, he strongly suggested I spend a day or two in Greenwich. He said, "If you want to understand what wealth means to your life before you hit middle age and get old, I believe you'll find your answer there." So I went looking for answers, and this episode is the result. For me personally, I hope this is something I can leave for myself in 10 or 20 years. Maybe on some afternoon when I'm as old as that mentor, I'll scroll through YouTube and see this 20-year-old video. I'll still remember this accidental encounter in my life, the people, the stories, the shops, and all the smiles here. Greenwich's inspiration to me, as an average person, not second generation or third generation, is to work hard at being the first generation and do that job well. Prepare a safe harbor for yourself and your family before the economic cycle hits. Especially when I was eating at a Chinese restaurant here, watching people the age of my parents come and go. Reflecting on my parents' health and appearance 20 or 30 years ago, I realized 20 years passes in the blink of an eye. In this city, I felt that even with a lot of money, life is very short. Since I've done my duty as the first generation, I should go out and experience the world to the fullest. I sincerely wish for those of you watching, may we all find our own safe harbor in the next turbulent era. Thanks again for your likes and subscriptions. Don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next share from another city.